Dr. Sarah had spent 3 years at the research station in Antarctica. She was which meant she studied the possibility of life beyond Earth. Most people thought her job was strange. After all, humanity had never found aliens. But Sarah believed they were out there somewhere, watching and waiting. The morning of her disappearance started like any other. She woke at 5 in the morning, made herself a cup of instant coffee, and checked the weather reports. A storm was coming in from the west, but she had a few hours before it arrived. Enough time to check the remote sensors she had placed near the ice shelf. Sarah pulled on her thermal gear and stepped outside. The cold hit her face like a slap. Even after 3 years, she never got used to it. The temperature was -40 degrees, and the wind made it feel even colder. She walked to the garage and climbed into her snowcat, a small tracked vehicle designed for Antarctic travel. The drive to the sensor station took about an hour. Sarah listened to old rock music on her headphones and watched the endless white landscape roll past. There was something peaceful about Antarctica. No cities, no crowds, no noise, just ice and sky and silence. She reached the sensor station and climbed out. The equipment looked fine. She downloaded the data onto her tablet and was about to head back when she noticed something strange. There was a light in the sky, pale blue and moving fast. At first she thought it was a satellite or maybe a plane, but it was too low and too bright. The light stopped directly above her. Sarah felt her heart begin to race. She had spent her entire career hopping for this moment, but now that it was happening, she felt only fear. The light grew brighter and brighter until she could not see anything else. Then everything went dark. When she woke up, she was lying on a cold metal floor. The room around her was small and gray, with no windows and no doors that she could see. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. Sarah tried to stand, but her legs felt weak. Her head was pounding. She was not alone. A figure stood in the corner of the room, watching her. It was tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. Its limbs were too long, its fingers too many. When it moved, it made no sound at all. Sarah had imagined meeting aliens many times. She had imagined what she would say, what questions she would ask. But now, face to face with something not human, she could not speak. She could only stare. The creature tilted its head, studying her like she was an insect under glass. Then it turned and walked through the wall, disappearing as if the metal was made of smoke. Sarah was alone again. She pressed her hands against the walls, searching for a way out. There was nothing. No seams, no panels, no openings. She was trapped. She sat down on the floor and pulled her knees to her chest. For the first time since she was a child, she began to cry. Back on Earth, the storm had arrived. The other researchers at station tried to contact Sarah by radio, but there was no response. They waited for the weather to clear, assuming she had taken shelter somewhere along the route. Antarctic protocol was clear: never search during a storm. It was too dangerous. 20 hours later, when the winds finally died down, a search team set out. They found the snowcat 3 kilometers from the sensor station. It was overturned, lying on its side in the snow. The metal was covered in strange burns, as if someone had pressed a hot brand against it. There were no tracks around the vehicle, no footprints, no signs of struggle. Dr. Sarah was gone. The station commander, a Norwegian man named, stared at the scene for a long time. He had worked in Antarctica for 15 years. He had seen accidents, injuries, even deaths. But he had never seen anything like this. He picked up Sarah's glove from the snow. It was still warm. Made the call to the American authorities that night. He expected bureaucracy, paperwork, maybe a few weeks of investigation. What he got instead was something different entirely. Within 6 hours, the news had spread far beyond official channels. Sarah's father, James, had served in the United States Navy for 30 years before his retirement. He was a quiet man who kept to himself, but he had made friends during his service. Important friends. Friends who owed him favors. Admiral William Cross received the call at 3 in the morning. He listened without interrupting as James explained what had happened. The burns on the snowcat, the missing researcher, the warm glove in the frozen snow. Cross had commanded warships for 20 years. He had seen combat, ordered strikes, made decisions that cost lives. But as he listened to James speak, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. It was not anger exactly. It was something older and deeper, something primal. He hung up the phone and sat in the darkness for a moment. Then he began making calls of his own. The first call went to Washington. The second went to Moscow. Admiral had been Cross's enemy for most of his career. They had spent decades preparing for a war that never came, studying each other's tactics, anticipating each other's moves. They had never spoken directly, never met in person. They were shadows to each other, names on intelligence reports. When answered the phone, Cross spoke in Russian. It was rusty but understandable. "Something has taken one of our people," Cross said. "Not yours, not mine, one of ours, a human being." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Tell me everything," said. Information spread like fire. Intelligence agencies that had spent decades spying on each other began sharing data openly. The Chinese Space Agency released classified orbital recordings that showed an unidentified object descending over Antarctica. British Signals Intelligence provided communications intercepts that revealed strange transmissions coming from the asteroid belt. The Indians offered their satellite network for tracking. The Japanese contributed their deep space observation arrays. Within 48 hours, humanity had pieced together enough information to know three things. First, the object that took Sarah was not from Earth. Second, it had come from somewhere in the asteroid belt, roughly 300 million kilometers away. Third, it was still out there. The United Nations held an emergency session. Diplomats argued about jurisdiction, protocols, and procedures. They debated the legal status of extraterrestrial contact and the proper response to what might be an act of war. But while the politicians talked, the soldiers acted. In shipyards around the world, engineers began working on something unprecedented. They did not have time to design new ships from scratch. Instead, they took what they had and combined it. American weapons systems, Russian engines, Chinese shielding, European navigation, Indian communications, Japanese sensors. The result was ugly. It looked like a mechanical monster, all angles and welded seams. Engineers who saw the designs shook their heads and said it would never work. There were too many incompatible systems, too many different standards, too many opportunities for failure. But they built it anyway. The ship was called Unity, though the crews who served on it had other names for it. Some called it the Frankenstein, others called it the Coffin. A few, with dark humor, called it the human condition. Sarah's mother watched the news from her small apartment in San Francisco. She was 73 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had never been interested in politics or military affairs. But now she sat in front of her television for hours at a time, watching the coverage of the impossible ship being built in orbit. James called her every day. He was in Washington now, working with the military officials coordinating the mission. He could not tell her much, but he told her enough. "They're going to bring her home," he said. Did not ask how. She did not ask about the risks or the chances of success. She simply said, "I know." Around the world, people watched and waited. There were protests, of course. Some people thought humanity should not respond with force. Some thought the whole thing was a hoax, a government trick to justify increased military spending. Some simply could not believe that aliens existed at all. But most people felt something different. They felt it in their bones, in their blood, in the part of themselves that was older than civilization. One of their own had been taken. A daughter, a sister, a friend. It did not matter that most of them had never met Sarah. It did not matter that they lived in different countries, spoke different languages, different gods. She was human, that was enough. In a monitoring station orbiting a distant asteroid, they watched the transmissions from Earth with confusion. They had studied humanity for decades. They knew about human wars, human hatred, human cruelty. They had seen nations destroy each other over strips of land, over differences in belief, over nothing at all. They had expected humanity to argue about what to do. They had expected debates, divisions, delays. They had expected the usual human chaos. Instead, they saw something they did not understand. They saw enemies working together. They saw old grudges set aside. They saw a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself suddenly, inexplicably, stop. Ambassador Oran reviewed the intelligence reports and felt the first stirring of doubt. Perhaps they had made a mistake. Perhaps they had misunderstood something fundamental about these strange, violent, unpredictable creatures. But it was too late to reconsider now. The humans were coming. The Unity launched from Earth orbit on a Tuesday morning. Sarah had been missing for 23 days. The crew consisted of 47 men and women from 12 different nations. Some of them had trained together for years. Others had met for the first time during the hasty preparation for the mission. They spoke different languages, came from different backgrounds, had different beliefs, but they all understood why they were there. Commander Maria Santos, a Brazilian astronaut with 20 years of experience, sat in the command chair and looked at the screens around her. The ship was still untested. Its systems had never been pushed beyond basic trials. They had no idea what they would find when they reached their destination. "Final checks complete," said Lieutenant, the Russian pilot. "All systems are green." Maria nodded. She opened a channel to Mission Control. "Unity to Houston, Moscow, and Beijing. We are ready for departure." 3 voices came back, speaking in 3 languages, all saying the same thing. "You are cleared for launch. Bring her home." Maria turned to her crew. They were watching her, waiting. She could see the fear in their eyes, but she could see something else too, something hard and bright. "You all know the mission," she said. "You all know the risks. We're going farther than any human has ever gone before to face something we don't understand. Some of us might not come back." She paused, letting the words settle. "But out there, somewhere in the darkness, one of us is waiting. One human being, alone and afraid, taken from her home by creatures who thought they could do whatever they wanted. They were wrong." She turned back to the screens. "Let's go show them what happens when you touch a human." The engines fired. The Unity began to move, slowly at first, then faster and faster. Within minutes, it was speeding toward the asteroid belt at a velocity no human spacecraft had ever achieved. Behind them, the Earth grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another point of light in the endless dark. Ahead of them, destiny waited. They had made a terrible mistake. They had watched humanity from a distance and thought they understood what they saw. They had seen the wars, the hatred, the divisions. They had concluded that humans were weak, fragmented, easy to ignore. They had not understood the truth. Humanity was a family. A broken, complicated, dysfunctional family that argued and fought and hurt each other constantly. But families have a strange quality. They can tear each other apart over the smallest things, but let an outsider threaten one of their own, and everything changes. They were about to learn this lesson. And they were about to learn it the hard way. The journey took 18 days. For 18 days, the crew of the Unity lived in close quarters, running drills, checking systems, preparing for a battle they did not know how to fight. They had no intelligence about the defenses. They had no experience with alien technology. They had only their training, their weapons, and their determination. Lieutenant Wei, a Chinese engineer, spent most of her time in the engine room, monitoring the fusion reactors that powered the ship. She had helped design the propulsion system, combining Russian and American technology in ways that had never been attempted before. Every day, she expected something to fail. Every day, it did not. Sergeant Thomas Murphy, an American Marine, trained with his squad in the cargo bay. They practiced breaching exercises, room-clearing drills, close-quarters combat. They did not know what they would face on the station. They prepared for everything. Doctor, a Japanese physician, ran medical simulations and stockpiled supplies. She had studied what little information they had about alien biology. It was not much. She hoped it would be enough. And Commander Maria Santos sat in her chair and watched the stars slide past, thinking about Sarah. She had read everything she could find about the missing. She had looked at photographs of her at her graduation, at her wedding, at her research station in Antarctica. She had read her papers and her personal notes. Sarah was not just a mission objective. She was a person, a human being with hopes and fears and dreams. Someone who had looked up at the stars her whole life, wondering what was out there. Maria promised herself that she would bring Sarah home, no matter what it cost. On the 15th day, they detected the station. It was hidden in a large asteroid, hollowed out and converted into a base. Sensors showed multiple ships docked at the station, along with energy signatures that suggested advanced technology. Maria called a meeting in the command center. She showed the crew what they were facing. "We don't know their weapons," she said. "We don't know their defenses. We don't know how many of them there are. What we do know is that they have one of our people in there, and we're going to get her out." She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "This is it. This is what we came for. Any questions?" Sergeant Murphy raised his hand. "What are the rules of engagement?" Maria smiled grimly. "They touched a human. There are no rules." The attack came at dawn, though dawn meant nothing in space. The Unity approached the asteroid from its dark side, using the rock itself as cover from detection. When they were close enough, the Marines loaded into boarding pods. There were 20 of them, 20 human beings in armored suits, carrying weapons designed to kill. They came from 10 different countries. Some of them had fought against each other in past conflicts. Now they were brothers and sisters in arms. Murphy checked his rifle one last time. He looked at the faces around him. Some were scared. Some were calm. Some were praying silently. "Remember why we're here," he said. "One human, that's all. One person who needs us. Let's not let her down." The pods launched. They detected them too late. By the time their defense systems activated, the first pod had already breached the station's outer hull. Murphy and his squad poured through the gap, weapons ready. The inside of the station was strange. The walls were smooth and gray, covered in those glowing symbols that Sarah had seen in her cell. The air smelled wrong, chemical and cold. There was no gravity. The Marines floated through the corridors, using their suits' thrusters to maneuver. The first they encountered was unarmed, some kind of technician or scientist. It turned to look at them with its large black eyes, and Murphy saw something in those eyes that might have been surprise. He shot it anyway. The battle for the station lasted 3 hours. They fought back, but they were not warriors. They were scientists, observers, record keepers. They had never expected anyone to attack them. They had never imagined that humanity would come for them. The Marines moved through the station like ghosts, clearing room after room, searching for Sarah. They found laboratories filled with specimens from 100 worlds. They found archives containing data on species that had never made it into space. They found stasis pods holding creatures that had been taken just like Sarah, frozen and waiting for dissection. And then they found her. She was in a medical bay, strapped to a table, connected to machines that monitored her vital signs. Her eyes were closed. She was so still that Murphy thought at first she was dead. But the monitors showed a heartbeat, slow but steady. Murphy cut away the straps. He lifted Sarah in his arms. She weighed almost nothing in the zero gravity. "I've got her," he said into his radio. "Doctor is secure. Repeat, doctor is secure." A cheer went up from the command center. Maria Santos closed her eyes and let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. "All units fall back to the ship," she ordered. "We're going home." The retreat was messy. They had finally organized a counterattack. Marines fell as they pulled back toward the boarding pods. Private took a hit to the chest and died before she could reach the airlock. Lieutenant James Washington was wounded in the leg and had to be carried by his. But they made it. They made it to the pods, they made it to the ship, they made it away from the asteroid before they could stop them. Murphy sat in the medical bay as Doctor worked on Sarah. The woman's eyes were still closed, but her color was better. She was breathing on her own now. "Will she live?" Murphy asked. Nodded slowly. "She's been through trauma, physical and psychological. It will take time for her to recover, but yes, she will live." Murphy looked down at Sarah's face. He had never met this woman. He did not know her. But he had traveled 300 million kilometers to save her. 3 of his friends had died in the assault, and if he had to do it all over again, he would not hesitate. Because that was what humans did. They protected their own. The Unity began the long journey back to Earth. The word reached Earth before the ship did. Sarah was alive. She was coming home. The celebrations were global. In cities around the world, people poured into the streets, cheering and crying and holding up signs. Strangers hugged each other. Enemies shook hands. For one brief moment, humanity forgot all the things that divided them and remembered the one thing that united them. Watched the news from her apartment, tears streaming down her face. James held her hand and did not speak. There was nothing to say. But the celebration was not the end. It was not even the most important part. Because humanity had done something unprecedented. They had found an alien civilization. They had proven that they were not alone in the universe, and they had sent a message. The message was simple: do not touch us. They understood. In the aftermath of the attack, they from the solar system. Their monitoring stations went silent. Their ships disappeared from human sensors. For a time, it seemed like they had given up on humanity entirely. But before they left, they sent a transmission of their own. It was received by every radio telescope on Earth, broadcast on every frequency. The message was in English, Russian, Chinese, and a dozen other languages. It was short and to the point. "We understand now. We will not return, but we will tell others what we have learned. Your species is not to be touched. Your species is not to be harmed. Your species is dangerous." Humanity received the message and did not respond. They did not need to. The Unity returned to Earth on a cold morning in November. The ship was damaged by combat, barely holding together. But it held together long enough. It held together until Sarah could set foot on her own planet again. She walked down the ramp on shaky legs, supported by Murphy on one side and Santos on the other. A crowd was waiting. Thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, gathered at the landing site to welcome her home. Sarah looked at the faces around her. She saw people of every race, every nationality, every belief. She saw soldiers and scientists, politicians and ordinary citizens. She saw her mother, standing at the front of the crowd, reaching out to her. She fell into his arms and wept. "I knew you would come," she whispered. "I knew you would find me." Held her daughter and stroked her hair. "Of course we did," she said. "You're one of us." In the days that followed, there were debriefings, medical examinations, psychological evaluations. Sarah told the authorities everything she had seen, their technology, their plans. She described the specimens in their laboratories, the archives in their databases, the clinical way they had studied her like she was an animal. But there was one thing she could not describe. She could not explain what it felt like to be alone in that cell, millions of kilometers from home, certain that no one was coming. She could not explain the moment when the door opened and human faces appeared, when she heard human voices speaking human languages. She could not explain what it meant to be rescued. But she did not need to explain. Everyone understood. Because everyone had felt the same thing when they heard the news. Everyone had felt that surge of pride and relief and fierce joy. Everyone had thought, at least for a moment, that could have been me. And humanity did come. Not because Sarah was important or famous or powerful, not because she had done anything to deserve it, but simply because she was human. That was the lesson they learned. That was the message humanity sent to the galaxy. Touch one of us and you face all of us. Hurt one of us and there is nowhere in the universe you can hide. We are human. We are family. And we protect our own. 6 months after Sarah's return, the United Nations held a special assembly. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered in New York to discuss the future. The discovery of alien life had changed everything. Old conflicts seemed petty now, old hatreds meaningless. Humanity had seen the universe beyond their little planet, and they could never go back to what they were before. Was invited to speak. She was not a politician or a diplomat. She was just a retired schoolteacher, a mother who had waited and hoped and prayed for her daughter's return. But the world wanted to hear from her. She stood at the podium and looked out at the assembled delegates. She was nervous. She had never spoken to such a crowd before, but she had something to say, and she was going to say it. "You watched us," she said. "From out there in the darkness, you watched us. You saw our wars and our hatreds. You saw us hurt each other, kill each other, destroy each other, and you thought you understood us." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You were wrong." Her voice grew stronger. "We fight because we care. We argue because we want things to be better. We hurt each other because we are close enough to hurt. That is what family does. We are messy and complicated and difficult, but we are also loyal. We are also brave. We are also capable of love so fierce it spans the stars." She looked directly into the camera, knowing that her words were being broadcast across the planet and beyond. "You touched my daughter. You took her from her home and planned to cut her apart like a specimen, and every nation on this world stopped what they were doing to bring her home, not because she was special, not because she was important, but because she was ours." Her eyes were bright with tears, but her voice did not waver. "We are not united by our governments or our flags. We are united by our blood. We are united by our humanity. Harm one of us and you face all of us. This is not a threat. This is not a boast. This is simply what we are." She stepped back from the podium. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the applause began. It started slowly, a few hands clapping, then more and more, until the entire assembly was on its feet, cheering and shouting and crying. Outside, in the streets of New York, the crowds heard the speech on their phones and their screens. They heard it in cafes in Paris and offices in Tokyo and markets in Lagos. They heard it in every corner of the world, in every language. And they understood. Humanity was not perfect. They were violent and petty and cruel. They wasted time on meaningless conflicts and ignored the suffering of their neighbors. They were capable of great evil. But they were also capable of great good. They were capable of crossing the void between stars for the sake of a single person. They were capable of putting aside their differences when something truly mattered. They were capable of standing together against the darkness. They had seen humanity at its worst and thought that was all there was. They had not seen humanity at its best. They had not understood that the same species that could tear itself apart could also come together with a force that shook the stars. They understood now. And so did the rest of the galaxy. They spread the word to every civilization they knew. They told them about the strange, violent, unpredictable creatures on the third planet from an unremarkable star. They told them about the rescue mission, about the battle, about the message. They told them to stay away. Because humanity was dangerous. Not because of their weapons or their technology, though those were impressive, but because of something deeper, something that could not be or measured or understood. Humans called it many things: love, loyalty, family, the fire that burned in their hearts when one of their own was threatened. The rest of the galaxy learned to call it by another name. They called it the human condition, and they learned to fear it. Sarah returned to her work eventually. She went back to Antarctica, back to the research station, back to the sensors and the ice and the endless white horizon. But things were different now. She was different. She stood outside the station one evening looking up at the stars. They seemed different now too. Once they had been mysterious and inviting, full of possibility. Now she knew what was out there. She knew that the universe was vast and dangerous and full of creatures that did not care about humanity at all. But she also knew something else. She knew that somewhere out there, every alien civilization had heard the same message. They knew what happened when you touched a human. They knew what humanity was capable of. And she smiled, because humanity was not alone anymore. They had made contact with the universe, and the universe had learned to respect them, not because they were the strongest or the most advanced, but because they were the most loyal, because they would cross any distance, face any danger, pay any price to protect their own. She touched the small scar on her wrist, a souvenir from her time in the laboratory. She would carry that scar for the rest of her life. It was a reminder of what she had been through, of how close she had come to dying alone in the darkness. But it was also a reminder of what had saved her. Not technology, not luck, not fate. Family. Humanity had come for her because that was what humans did. They took care of each other. They fought for each other. They died for each other. And they would keep doing it, for as long as there were humans left to fight. Sarah looked up at the stars one last time. Then she turned and walked back inside. She had work to do. There were sensors to check, data to analyze, discoveries to make. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and she was going to explore it. But she would never forget what she had learned. She was never truly alone. She was human, and that meant she had the whole world at her back.